And so you have a situation where $5.5 billion is being spent, and that's just what we know about, on U.S. military operations a month in Afghanistan, and between 25 and 40 cents on every dollar is going directly to for-profit corporations. Now, of those 74,000, not all of them are armed contractors, but all of them are, in fact, doing jobs that were once done by the uniformed U.S. military. The Obama administration now is considering the request that is being portrayed as General McChrystal's request for 40,000 more troops, but I think that we should be a bit more savvy than the media would like us to be when we look at the political situation unfolding between the military and the Obama administration. I do not believe for 1 second that there is a conflict between General McChrystal and President Obama. I think that General McChrystal is being used, and not in a conspiratorial way, but is being used to sort of float a public opinion balloon on the issue of 40,000 troops, so that when the Obama administration escalates by 20,000 or 30,000, that it will seem as though the president listened to the people, listened to the commanders, and then took the sort of center road. Remember that that Obama on the campaign trail pledged to increase U.S. forces in Afghanistan by a factor of about 20,000 U.S. troops. So anything 20,000 and above is precisely what he said he was going to do. The 40,000 number, if you talk to other people within the U.S. military, is not an actual number that they're looking for right off the bat. It's sort of a way of overselling it to get what you actually want and give the public perception that it's less than the military wanted, and therefore Obama is a moderate on Afghanistan. There is no question that we're going to see an escalation in Afghanistan and also an increase in U.S. troops. It's just a matter of the mathematics now. Why that becomes more important as we go forward is that the U.S. military now operates at a basic 1-to-1 ratio with private contractors in terms of the overall operations in the theater of command that includes Iraq and Afghanistan. There are 500,000 U.S. personnel that are being paid to operate and fight those wars. Half of them, full 50%, are made up of private contractors. So we're going to see an increase in the number of private contractors in Afghanistan. Similar to what the U.S. did in Iraq with the construction of a $700 million colonial fortress that they call an embassy, the Obama administration a couple of months ago asked the Congress for almost the exact amount of money, $760 million, to build a massive U.S. embassy in Islamabad that is modeled after the Iraq embassy. And this Islamabad facility is going to be the hub of all U.S. operations in that area and is going to remain a permanent presence for many, many decades to come. That will, in fact, necessitate huge numbers of paramilitary forces working for private companies, because that is how the business of diplomatic security is done now in the United States. It's entirely outsourced to paramilitary firms like Blackwater, Triple Canopy, and DynCorp. In fact, these forces are already operating inside of Pakistan. Blackwater, it was recently revealed, is a central part of the CIA's drone bombing program that has taken the lives of 700 Pakistani civilians since March of 2006 and has killed less than 30 suspected Taliban or Al-Qaeda terrorists, if you will, as they put it. So the ratio of civilians to actual bad guys, as they like to put it, is incredible. Senator John Kerry, who is chair of the Foreign Relations Committee, and Russ Feingold, also a member of that committee, have raised the prospect that the drone attacks, when they kill these civilians, are actually increasing the number of people that want to kill Americans or want to participate in an insurgency against the U.S. presence in the region. This policy is making it worse. It's making ultimately our country less safe, because it's giving people a real-life motivation to go after the United States when one may not have existed prior to that. So even within the parameters of the most mainstream corporate debate, the reason that we're seeing an increase in opposition to the war in Afghanistan is I think people are starting to understand that this war is quite likely making the United States of America a less safe nation and making it more dangerous for people from the U.S. to go abroad. The money issue is another huge part of this. I think that people are starting to realize that nothing is being accomplished in Afghanistan. We're not being kept safer. And the idea that we're going to subject thousands, if not tens of thousands, more young Americans to a tin coffin coming back to Dover Air Force Base doesn't make sense. On the issue of Blackwater in Afghanistan, it's an incredible story because not only is this company working for the CIA, it started working with the CIA in April of 2002 and was deployed to Afghanistan in the early stages of U.S. operations there, and it kind of went from there. But Blackwater works at every level of the Afghan operations. They work as a private security force on contract with the U.S. State Department. They work as trainers for the Afghan military and the Drug Enforcement Administration in Afghanistan. They're being paid hundreds of millions of dollars on both of those contracts. In the case of the State Department, you have Hillary Clinton, the Secretary of State, on the campaign trail pledging, if she was elected president, to ban Blackwater and other mercenary firms. Now she is their employer. They protect her. They guard her. They guard Richard Holbrooke. I was just with Representative Jan Schakowsky in Washington, D.C. doing an event, and Jan Schakowsky said that she had just been in Afghanistan where she was protected by Blackwater. In fact, she has pictures of herself with these Blackwater guards. If members of Congress are supposed to be investigating these companies, and yet when they go to look at their operations in Iraq or Afghanistan and are guarded by those very companies, how far do you think that investigation is going to go? It's a remarkable situation where you have a total outsourcing of the security operations for all U.S. civilian personnel in Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Iraq. On the issue of the broader political aims of the war, when Obama was on the campaign trail, Afghanistan was his issue. This was the issue where he was going to show himself to be tough on crime, so to speak. The sort of Willie Horton scenario gone international, where he's going to show that he's a badass. And he prided himself on the campaign trail with being the only candidate that really was calling for a substantial escalation of the war in Afghanistan. In fact, he would regularly say that President Bush and John McCain followed behind him in calling for a surge in troops in Afghanistan and made it a centerpiece of his campaign. I thought it was devastatingly shameful that at Invesco Stadium, when Obama accepted the Democratic nomination to run for president, he invoked, and other speakers invoked, the name of Martin Luther King while giving a speech in which he called for a substantial escalation of war. The Democrats at that time, even anti-war Democrats, when I talked to them in the halls of the Democratic National Convention, it was as though they had checked their spines at the door to that convention center, walked in, and were characterizing the Afghanistan war as a good war. Now, last week, there was mention earlier of the hate crimes legislation that was passed. What is almost never discussed is that that hate crimes legislation was passed as part of the military spending bill. Only one Democrat in the Senate, Russ Feingold, voted against the war spending bill this time, and he said that despite the hate crimes legislation that was attached to it, this bill does nothing to end our wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. It's somewhat of a cynical move or a cynical reality that is presented by this, where hate crimes legislation is passed at the same time as military funding that's going to be used to go and kill people overseas. We really saw a clear indication of how pathetic the Democratic Party is this past summer, when there was an opportunity for the first defeat of the war spending bill in a long time. The reason why you had the prospect of a defeat for the war spending bill, which would be a symbolic way for the Congress to express the outrage or the dissatisfaction of the American people with the war policy. The reason why we had an opportunity to stop the war funding bill is because the White House insisted on attaching to the war funding bill in June a $100 billion bailout for the International Monetary Fund. What that meant is that the Republicans rose up against it and said, we don't want anything to do with, they called it a global bailout. We don't want anything to do with funding the International Monetary Fund, so we're going to vote against the war funding bill. Only 5 Republicans in the end ended up supporting it. The reason I'm telling you this is because there are about 120 members of the House of Representatives that would characterize themselves as anti-war, that signed pledges not to vote in favor of any war spending until there is a firm timeline put in place. What that meant is that the White House needed to flip some of those anti-war lawmakers and get them to vote for the war spending bill, or it was going to be defeated.